Welcome to the Wildcast, my friends. I just finished an unbelievable conversation with Richard Bernstein, who is a Supreme Court justice in Michigan. He is blind, has a real disability, and we are interviewing him. I was interviewing him because I thought it'd be great for us, those of us dealing with adversity and struggle in life, even if it's a small struggle, to hear from someone who has a serious disability and serious struggle. How does he not only overcome it and just live a normal life, but how does he accomplish so much? This man is going to Dubai, to Egypt, and helping families deal with their children who have disabilities, creating real peace on the ground between Israel and some of her Arab neighbors. He is part of the Abraham Accords. I had no idea that Richard was officially part of the State Department and their Abraham Accords. We talked a little about his working on the bench, acquitting individuals that were unjustly convicted of crimes. He told us some incredible stories about that, and also got into what it means to be blind, that he is able to pick up on certain things that those of us with sight are unable to. And I found that fascinating. He's got emunah, which is the Hebrew word for faith. He believes deeply in God and in finding purpose and meaning in life. And all of that is so important to overcoming adversity and finding resilience. We are a generation that struggles with resilience in some of the simpler parts of our lives. Let's hear from someone who's able to be resilient in something really difficult, a tremendous struggle like being blind. Look at the amazing work that this man is doing. Take a listen, tune in, comment, and to subscribe. Welcome to the Wildcast. Richard Bernstein, welcome to the Wildcast. It is a great, great honor to have you here. Such a special, you and I have known each other for many, many years. I have the greatest respect and regard for you, but I've never seen you in a judge's robe. This is with the flags in the back. It's unbelievable.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. It's a pleasure. First off, welcome to the Supreme Court of the great state of Michigan. And we're delighted to have you here in Lansing coming to visit with us. And honestly, it's always a pleasure to have a chance to talk to you, Rabbi. You bring out the best in everyone that you meet, and you have this natural ability to make people feel good and empower people to do great things.
That is very kind. It's so sweet. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate that. I'm just looking at you in that robe. You were elected as the first blind justice with really statewide support, rather, from Michigan Supreme Court. Tell us, what does that historic accomplishment mean to
Well, I
you?
think what it means is it means that Michigan is really an excellent state, and that I'm blessed to live in a state like Michigan where the voters were willing to give me an opportunity to serve them in this capacity. And often is the case when you talk to someone who's blind or has a severe disability, people can sometimes think, well, can they perform in this job? Can they live up to the expectations? Can they handle the workload? Can they deal with all the challenges that come out of a position like this on a daily basis? And the Michigan voters in 2014 said overwhelmingly yes, that this is somebody we want to have serving us, that this is somebody that we believe in, and this is someone we're going to give an opportunity to. And then just recently, just very recently, actually, I was reelected to the position. So I'll be here for quite a long time because I got elected once and then miraculously got reelected. And I'm actually proud to say that in the reelection, I actually got far more votes in the reelection than in my first time running. So looks like I'll
Wow.
be here for quite some time.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that. That's really, really incredible. You are quoted as saying that one of the blessings of being born with a disability is that you've been given the opportunity to impact people in a way you never thought possible. Tell us a little about that, because I'll tell you why we're doing this. This podcast is part of a series about dealing with adversity, overcoming challenges. A lot of us in our generation are struggling with the concept of resilience, of learning how to really deal with just the regular challenges of life. And when I met you, Richard, so many years ago, and I see like not only the disability you're dealing with, but like how positive you've stayed all these years and how accomplished. We're going to get to this a little later. Most people perhaps don't even know yet, but Richard completed 22 marathons. He was a
Well,
full
actually,
art.
it's 2027.
Okay. Okay.
Because
20.
we just finished New York just about a month ago.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
27
and
marathons.
I'll be doing Miami in January. So hopefully by January that will be up to 28.
Unbelievable. And you're an Iron Man.
Yes, that's correct.
So that like how tell us how you've done this. And I mean just there's so many, unfortunately, so many young men and women that are, I mean, all of us, we're struggling with just resilience on such a, I don't want to say lower level, but dealing with so much less kind of trauma and experiences than you've had your whole life being blind for so long. How have you done it? How do you stay A, positive and B, so accomplished?
Well, I think that's a very kind question. And I would say, I think a lot of it comes to do with having a sense of mission and trying to live with a sense of purpose and understanding that you're sent here and that you're created to do something that's going to have an impact, that's going to make a difference for other people, that's going to make lives better for other people. And one of the bigger challenges that I had, in addition to being blind, was I had a bicycle accident in Central Park a couple of
Yeah.
years back. And that made things, I think, even more difficult than the blindness because you have to live with a chronic sense of pain. And pain is something which is very interesting because it is always present and you feel it when you wake up in the morning to when you go to sleep at night to when you're kept up at night because of the pain that comes out of, the injuries that you tend to have. And you have to learn to live with that pain day in and day out. So sometimes when you have that situation, having a job like this, which is a very high stressed, very high intensity position, because literally every decision that you're making can ultimately determine life and death of a person. We don't have the death penalty in Michigan, but I can assure you that serving a life prison sentence in one of our penitentiaries in some circumstances could be deemed as being worse than death. So sometimes when you're going through a level of physical pain that you have to feel every single day and every single night because of injuries, if you have a challenging position, that position can sometimes take your mind away from the physical challenges that you're
Mhm.
dealing with and allow for you to focus on ultimately the challenges that the people that are coming before you have to encounter and have to deal with. And you have to live and serve with that sense of mission. You have to live and serve with that sense of purpose. And you have to live and serve with that sense of focus. Because ultimately, every day that I'm here on the bench, for all intents and purposes, there are people's entire lives that are going to be impacted by the decisions that we make. And that I think is what kind of drives you. And when you say optimistic, I don't think it's as much about being optimistic or joyous as it is about being determined and basically understanding why God created you, what you were sent here to do, and what your overall mission is, and how you have to accomplish and achieve it.
Wow. Wow. So for people listening to this, Richard, to be able to derive benefit from this wisdom that you're sharing, you're saying, and tell me if I have it right,
Mhm.
that if you have a purpose and you have a mission in life, that will help you deal with the adversity, deal with the challenges, deal with the obstacles because you're staying focused on that purpose and mission, which is really filling you. And
That's
and
correct. And, and
and
it, and it also, and if you also are a person that may be suffering from a disease, or you're suffering from an injury, or you're suffering from a physical pain that you have to go through that's constantly with you, that the more determined you are to focus on other things, and usually that means focusing on other people, the easier it is to deal with that challenge that you have to face.
yeah, I mean, I remember, Richard, when you had that terrible accident in Central Park, and I was like, this could not, I felt like, oh my God, it
It
was
was a
so
10 weeks of hospitalization. So it was quite a thing. But one thing that they haven't been able to manage totally is pain. So pain is something that just kind of sticks
stays.
around, and you have to learn to live with that on a constant basis.
Yeah. And would you say that, let's say, MGE is all about trying to offer that kind of mission and purpose, expressed in Judaism, in one's Jewish identity and Torah and mitzvot. Do you believe that? I mean, you know what I think, but do you believe that, devoting oneself to that kind of lifestyle could also be helpful? Is that purpose and mission? Does it have to be professional?
No, I think it can be MJE. I think MJE does absolutely remarkable things for people. I think that what the Hendrix experience does for people is truly profound and absolutely incredible what MJE does. I mean, what I think you find is if people get involved with MJE, is you come to find that it allows for you to understand and appreciate why you were created. And I think that ability to serve God and to have a relationship with the Creator will allow for you to be strong in every other aspect of your life. So if you get involved with MJE, the blessing that will come out of it is that it's not just that you're serving yourself in the sense that you're allowing yourself to grow, but what you're doing is that you're becoming part of something bigger than yourself. You're growing into becoming a better person. You're growing into becoming a kinder person. You're growing into becoming a person that has a closer relationship with the Creator. And I think what you realize is that when you have that close relationship with the Creator, no matter what happens to you, like in my situation as a blind person, having done 27 marathons and Ironman, but then getting struck down and now living with chronic pain, it allows for you to have a certain level of comfort. Because if you go through life and you don't have MJE and you don't have that understanding, you don't have that perspective of having God in your life and the relationship with God and being able to build upon that, what will happen is that you'll start to look at life and you'll start to look at the things that happen in life as just bad luck. Or you'll
Mhm.
look at things that happen to you and you'll say, why me? This is always happening to me. I can't believe that I have to live through this. And I think sometimes when you allow for yourself to give yourself to God, or you allow yourself to be a part of a community, and you allow yourself to understand that, okay, there is something a little bit bigger here. There is something here that is a little stronger. There is something here that I might not appreciate or understand. People ask me, Rabbi, all the time, what's it like to be blind? And I think the example goes to MJE and what you're ultimately doing at MJE, which is if you ask somebody who's never seen before to explain the color blue, you can't do it unless you've seen the color blue at one time. It's a relational understanding. You can't, if you haven't seen blue or orange or red, and someone says to you, tell me what blue, orange, or red are, you're simply not able to convey that information because you don't have a basis of comparison. And I think what MJE really helps to do is it helps to answer those questions that people have, which is, what is the afterlife going to be like? Why do bad things happen to otherwise such good people? And I think what MJE does is it allows for you to live your life with a clear understanding of the fact that there are certain things that we just don't know. There are certain things that we just can't understand. There are certain things that we just can't comprehend. But we have to have faith that we're part of something that is bigger than ourselves. And through that faith and through that understanding comes that knowledge that, yes, I can't understand the concept of what God truly is, or I can't understand the concept of what the afterlife is truly going to be like, or yet I can't begin to appreciate why I'm created or why these things have happened. But it's just like for me, not being able to define or understand the color blue. It doesn't mean to me that the color blue doesn't exist because I know very well that it does. But I don't have a firsthand appreciation or
Wow.
firsthand relationship to understand what it means.
And
But I
what
know it
gives
exists.
this is very profound because that analogy with, let's say, you not being able to describe blue, our inability to describe or to answer some of these questions, but yet you still believe that there's a greater purpose, there's meaning in suffering. Um, what gives you that? Where'd you get that from? I'd love to believe we had something to do with that. You already did the great commercial for MG already, so you don't have to say anything more nice about
Well,
us. But were you always like such a person
I
of
think
faith?
it's I think it was the opportunities that presented themselves in the way that they have. And, I'll just give you kind of a quick example. This is
Yeah.
just a typical example of a case that I work on. And these are the kind of cases that I work on every day. But I was responsible for freeing, there were two young men who were sentenced to life in prison. But after looking at the file, and going through it, I just said to myself, there's something that isn't right here. This is not adding up. There's a lot of inconsistencies in the statements. There's a lot of things that aren't making sense. There's some recantations that seem to exist. And these were people that were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. So these two individuals they had served already 18 years in prison.
Whoa.
Yes, yes, yes. But
Whoa.
this happens more often than you can imagine. I would say that every term that we serve, basically a term starts in September and ends in August. And I would say that for every term that we serve, you sometimes come across on average, 3 to 4 of these types of cases where ultimately there are people that are imprisoned, but when you look at it a little closer, and you see kind of that, wow, there was a real breakdown here in terms of how the system functioned, how the system operated, the
Whoa.
type of testimony that took place, the way the testimony was done. And in certain situations, sometimes what government sometimes wants is that when there's a violent or brutal crime, they really want to get that wrapped up quickly.
Yeah.
So that way the political pressure can kind of lighten up. And a lot of times it happens more often than not, innocent people get caught in the crosshairs. And this was a perfect example of it. I mean, ultimately, these two young men, um, wrote the opinion and basically they're now free. They are no longer
And they
incarcerated.
were, and they served 18
They
years
served 18 years. Yeah.
awaiting trial.
No, no, they had a trial. They were convicted.
Oh, they were
Um,
falsely. Oh, wow.
But
Oh my
they
gosh.
were, and that happens, more often than not. They had a trial. Listen, Rabbi, what happens is, innocent until proven guilty. What tends to happen though in our criminal justice system is, and I deal with both. I deal with the criminal system and I deal with the civil system.
Mhm.
But what tends to happen often in these situations or in these circumstances is that juries tend to presume that if a person's been arrested, that they're automatically guilty. That
Mhm.
tends to be the presumption of a jury. So it kind of goes against what you tend to think that, oh, people seem to walk off with technicalities. That will happen in very high profile cases when you have an unlimited budget. But when you're a person that tends to be indigent, you can't afford an expert, you're using a public defender, often is the case that your fate can be sealed even before your first day of trial. So
Wow.
what it really requires is it requires really good appellate judges like myself who are on the high court. Because now if our court turns you down, you have nowhere else to go and you're going to
Mhm.
spend the rest of your life in prison. There's nowhere to go from my court. Once we kind of issue a final verdict, you're
That's
done.
it. That's
That's
it.
it. So
Eh,
you've got to be really careful when a case comes up here to make sure that, okay, if you're going to hold up the conviction, you've got to really, really be right about that. Because once that decision is entered, then the defendant doesn't have anywhere else to go. And for all intents and purposes, their life is over.
Wow.
But in the case that I'm talking about, these young men, I was able to work with my colleagues and convince them that, look, there's something wrong here. We need to really investigate this further, and we need to at least grant oral argument. And then in oral argument, you're able to ask the government a series of questions and see if the government can hold up to the questions that you're asking. And in this situation, they were not able to. So, a verdict was entered and these people were immediately released. That's
Wow.
why you asked, why do you stay faithful? It's because in this position, the power is so immense because once you sign an order and you're able to get your colleagues to agree with you and basically sign on to that order, then what ultimately happens is that order goes to the Department of Corrections and the person is released. That's it. There's no discussion, there's no conversation. An order is entered and they are sent home immediately. And that they become free. It doesn't fix their life because you're not going to get 18 years back because for all intents and purposes, you everyone else has moved on with their lives and you haven't. And I guess in many situations, a lot of these folks are just happy they can survive in a very violent environment like a correctional institution, which are very violent. So I think faith keeps you going in that regard because you just kind of that you're doing something that's really going to impact and affect a person's life, and you have to make
Incredible.
sure that you get it right. And
Incredible.
I'll just give you one other quick example. I wrote the opinion on the Flint water case, and I don't know if a lot of
Yeah.
the people that are there are familiar with it, but what happened in the city of Flint was that ultimately the government tried to save money. And so they used to take their water from the Detroit, it used to come in from Detroit and they would pipe it in. And ultimately, what happened was Flint got an emergency manager who decided to save money. And instead of taking the water and paying Detroit for the water, they decided to save money and they took the water from the Flint River. Now, just to give you an example of why this was such a bad idea, General Motors, which has a number of factories in Flint, stopped using the water from the Flint River because it was corroding their machinery.
Oh,
Yet the leaders of Flint decided that, well, we're going to take the water from the Flint River
oh my
and use
gosh.
it as our drinking water. So
Oh,
you had about 150,000 people that were impacted with this. And for a number of people died. But in addition to those who died, you also had a number of young children that developed lead poisoning, which basically affects their entire way of thinking, their entire way of processing information, their entire way of doing anything really in life. But the question was, did they have a grievance against the government? Just it's very complicated because the government was responsible for this, but the state is a sovereign. And because the state is a sovereign, there's a number of protections that the state has from civil litigation. And the reason for that is because in a case of this magnitude, if you're going to hold for the people of Flint, you're going to lose things. You're going to lose police, you're going to lose teachers, you're going to lose firefighters, because you're talking about billions of dollars
yeah.
that have to come from the state
There's a
budget.
lot of money dependent on this. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. And so you're going to have to decide between, well, these people that have been injured, should they get recompense or should they get compensation, or do we protect our police force and our teachers and our firefighters and things of that sort? But I wrote the opinion that said that no, this is that they were aggrieved by the government and that they have a constitutional right to basically be heard and to be listened to, and that the Flint water case basically had a huge impact because it set the guidelines and the precedents for what happens when government injures its citizenry. And even though it causes great trouble to a lot of people in the state, like our police, like our fire, like the choices that had to be made, the injuries of the people in Flint had to come first, and the state and we all as a collective had to pay for that.
Wow. So I want to make one comment on the first case that you talked about the
Yes.
two gentlemen that were unjustly convicted. But then I want to ask a bigger question, going back to our whole dealing with adversity, overcoming obstacles in life. I'll come back to that in a minute. Um, somebody getting falsely convicted, the Talmud, and I think you and I have spoken about this in the past, has a lot of safeguards to try to prevent false or improper or unjust convictions. In fact, the Talmud says that any Beit Din, which is a Jewish court, that convicts one every 7 years is a bloody Beit Din, meaning
Hmm.
that if they've convicted someone of a capital crime, once every 7 years, like what does that mean? It's a bloody Beit Din, something to the degree of like they're not following the rules properly because there are such difficult rules to satisfy that the prosecution has to satisfy in order to be able to convict somebody of a capital crime in Torah, in Judaism, because the consequences are so severe. We want to do now, it's not a perfect system either. Just because it's a religious system doesn't mean it's a perfect system either. But there's all of this, and I study the Tractate of Sanhedrin. We should study that together sometime, Richard.
That'd be
The
great.
the Sanhedrin is the Jewish high court. It brings in all of these new things that the defense can do last minute to avert a capital crime from someone being convicted of a capital crime. Now, again, it's not foolproof. And when I went to law school, I don't know if you know, Cardoza is very big on the Innocence Project,
Yes,
which is using DNA. I'm just curious. I'm going to get back to the theme of this podcast in a minute.
sure, of course.
I'm a lawyer and a rabbi, so I can't let that go. This is like so
Right.
juicy for me. Has DNA been helpful before your court?
Well, here's the challenge with DNA, and you'll be surprised to hear this, but often is the case that the government will sometimes protest the use of DNA in convictions that are when you have a conviction that is an older conviction, you don't have the absolute right to have DNA testing. You have
Okay.
to motion for it, and the court has to grant it. And it's not uncommon. And I can tell you a number of cases I've been involved in, where this has come up, that has to come all the way up to the Supreme Court. But where ultimately the government will sometimes argue, look, we got the right guy. DNA isn't going to show us anything, and we're objecting to a DNA test. So it's not as simple as, hey, I'm innocent. My DNA will show that I'm innocent. So let's just see if we can please go and collect it and then use it in the trial. It isn't.
It's not routinely used.
Well, what happens is that sometimes what can occur is you do have some prosecutors that want to have finality to the case. And because they want to have finality to the case, they will object to DNA testing. So you have to be able to, first off, before you get the DNA, you have to fight for it. It is not an automatic right that you're going to have a DNA test post conviction.
Do you agree with that rule?
No, I mean, any time it comes up here, my attitude is, of course you grant DNA testing. I mean, how
Right,
could you
right.
not? But what you have to realize is that it's very difficult for elected officials to sometimes say, hey, I was wrong, or I got the wrong guy, or we made a mistake, and they don't want to be embarrassed by that. And
Wow.
it can be very embarrassing because you're dealing with a lot of challenges. Like, first off, they don't want to open themselves up to litigation as it pertains to the fact that, okay, now you're going to get sued for the fact that you had an innocent person that's been in prison. And a lot of times they'll make the argument, especially if it was a heinous case, they'll say, why do you want to make the family go through this again? Why do you want to
Mhm.
make them have
Right.
to continue to live with this? So I guess the point of it is that DNA testing is absolutely an invaluable way of being of doing this. But and there are some prosecutors that are good that will say, yeah, let's DNA test, let's make sure we got the right guy. But what I want your audience to understand is that it isn't necessarily always used because the government will sometimes, not all the time, but enough times will object to DNA testing. So you have
Understood.
to get over the hurdle
Yeah.
of even getting the DNA test to start with when you're dealing with a post conviction.
So let's
And you
go.
have to hope that it's there. You have to hope that,
Yeah.
we've had issues in Michigan where the evidence is no longer there. So, where you had DNA testing kits that were lost and all these kinds of things. So you have to hope that the evidence is actually preserved and is actually safe.
Wow. So look,
There's a lot of problems.
it's a lot of problems, and you're clearly equipped to handle all this. This is amazing. So listen, tell me if I got this right, because I'm going to
Yes.
ask you a follow-up question. When I asked you, Richard, like, so how do you, stay positive, and how do you remain resilient, in dealing with your not only blindness but the pain from this last accident that you said. How many years ago was that?
It was like 10 years ago,
10
but
years ago.
the
So
challenge is as you get older, sadly the pain gets worse.
yeah, so I asked you, and you said, listen, look what I'm dealing with on this bench. In my professional work, I acquitted two men who were falsely or unjustly convicted. I am
And that's just one case. That's just
That's one
one.
case, and then
Yeah.
you talked about the Flint water case, which is fascinating and incredible. Like, what what does somebody do who's listening to this that, I don't know, works on Wall Street, and or they have a blue collar job. They're I don't know, they're an electrician, they're a locksmith, or They're a regular, attorney, not as, you know, powerful, not high up on the bench like you are. What do you tell somebody that doesn't have a professional, um, life or even aspirational ambition to to do the kind of work you're doing? Like how can their purpose and mission in life help them
I
overcome
think their purpose and
obstacles?
mission is like, especially if they work on Wall Street or whatever they're doing, if they get involved in MJE, I think that's a very helpful thing because ultimately there's a number of, you don't have to devote your life to this, but just do one or two really good things. Find something everyone has something that they care about. Everybody has something that they believe in, and everybody
Yeah,
has something that drives them. So find something that you really find to be of interest. Find something that you think, hey, you know what? I can make a difference by doing this. And then just go ahead and try to go and do it.
yeah.
But like, for example, if you work on Wall Street or if you have a blue collar job or whatever, your position is, you certainly have time outside of work that you can volunteer, and I know it sounds like a trite, simple answer.
No, it's not. It's real because not everybody's work can bring them that kind of satisfaction and that kind of purpose and meaning.
Well,
But
I'll tell you what, I've done, as we talked about, 27 marathons. Go and just volunteer with Achilles. Go and spend time in the
yeah,
park. It's very easy. You show up at Achilles when they meet, and you can do it Tuesdays. And I'm not going to say Saturday because it's on Shabbat, but you can, easily do it on Tuesday night after work. You can go and volunteer and you can walk with someone or you can run with somebody. But there's a lot of people that you can just walk with that, are going through some really difficult and challenging times, and you can walk with them and have a chance just to talk with them and have a chance just to become friendly with them. And Achilles would be your best outlet for that because it doesn't require a commitment. You don't have to say you're going to come every single day. But if you want to go and spend time with people who are soldiers that are trying to learn to use their new prosthetics or people that are dealing with physical pain or other types of challenges in their life, you go and you walk with them and you do like a loop around the park with them and you get a chance just to talk with them and spend time with them. And believe it or not, you've had a wonderful chance to get a good workout in and you don't
mhm,
have to be fast. You can just walk or you can whatever you want to do.
yeah,
And they'll match you up with someone that will go at that speed. But what's great is that you can finish up a workout and then make a new friend and have a new perspective on life. And volunteering doesn't have to be like you go to work at a soup kitchen or you do it. Really, a lot of it is just going and doing things that you like, but doing them with people that you care about. So
yeah,
do it with people that you care about, do it with people that you like, but have fun doing it. You don't have to look at it like you're punching in, like, okay, I'm going to volunteer at this specific place and do this specific thing. A lot of it is just basically doing things that you enjoy, but just including people in that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to spend time with somebody from MJE or have time to spend with, a person that they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to come across.
yeah. And I'm going to add, with your permission, Richard, I'm going to add another idea. Since the hostages were taken
Oh, sure,
over a year
totally.
ago, there's been a gathering in Central Park, right here on the Upper West Side, and meet at 11 o'clock. Jill and I have gone many times. Some people go every single Sunday. Some people just show up once in a while. Come at 11 o'clock. I think they meet on 90th and Columbus, and they always hear from somebody interesting to talk about the situation for about 15, 20 minutes, and then they all walk together. And like you said, it's a healthy walk, and it's showing your fellow New Yorkers that this is an issue that we care about and that we want to see some change on. And you mentioned also about soup kitchens. I always tell a lot of my students this is such a good date idea. Go to this place called Masbia. Masbia is a Hebrew word for satiation. Um, and to be satiated. There's a wonderful restaurant in Brooklyn, fully kosher, and it's free. And they don't ask questions. If you go into this restaurant, you're served a meal without being charged. And it's all based on people, sending in money, but also volunteers. So you can be in the kitchen. I went with my kids when they were little, and you can still do this. You can go to the kitchen, peel onions, or you can be outside serving. You can serve as a waiter. It's also social. It's nice. You're meeting interesting people, and you're helping. And I just love what you said before about finding something outside of your work because it's not always possible. I grew up in that kind of home. Um, I grew up in a kind of home where your work was like you had to do something, change the world. My dad was, as you know, devoted to his immigration work and his teaching at Cardoza, and that just filled him so much. But not everybody has that, and the work I do at MGE, I'm just blessed. But you got to have a life outside of work also. So,
Absolutely.
so I think that's really, really important. Let's talk a little more about some of your incredible volunteer work. You did 3 months of advocacy work in Dubai. Um,
Correct.
tell us a little about what you did. And there was an article about how in parts of the Arab world, even though a lot of children, of course, have disabilities, like in any other part of the world, it's still seen as taboo. I'd like to hear a little about that.
Sure. So I was privileged to be a part of the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords are probably without a question one of the most remarkable diplomatic accomplishments of our generation. I would say that the Abraham Accords really, for all intents and purposes, um, I'm not going to be political, but
Mm.
I think that if the Abraham Accords had been done by anybody else, they would have
Right.
gotten a Nobel Prize for it.
Yeah.
Because I think it was equally significant to the Camp David Accord. And, it's just, they're just a remarkable,
I
remarkable
mean,
thing.
if I can just jump in, I would argue more powerful because the Camp David Accords, let's say with Egypt, with Jordan, and thank God we've had a lasting peace with those. It's a cold peace. There's still terrible anti-Semitism in those countries. But the Abraham Accords, after the name Abraham, are all about cultural exchange and mutual respect for each other's faith systems. And that, I don't even think the Camp David Accords were even shooting for that. And that's what whatever. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to
No,
throw
no,
that.
no, no problem. But it's funny because I had and I share this not to be political, but I'm just going to share it, just because I always put issues before anything else,
Mhm,
especially before party. But I'm a Democrat. I was
mhm.
elected as a Democrat to this position, but I was asked to go and meet with President Trump, and he and I discussed the Abraham Accords,
Oh,
because
wow.
I had worked on the Abraham Accords, previously. And then it was just a short time ago, and I was asked if I could go and meet with the president and discuss it with him and talk about, what we were going to be doing, where we were going to be going, all the kind of next, the kind of next things that we were going to try to focus on. And it was it it was interesting just because I put issues before party because my
Uh,
party, as you can imagine, isn't thrilled that I would go and meet with President Trump to talk about this issue.
can you share what you discussed, or it's not
No,
doesn't?
of course. It was basically just the idea that um my job for the Abraham Accords was to handle the disability component of it, which is that ultimately the Abraham Accords is made up of a whole number of different things in terms of creating opportunity and creating partnership. My job was to basically facilitate how this is going to affect people with disabilities, what role this is going to have on people with disabilities. And the reason that that is significant, and I actually now work, I'm a consultant now to the State Department. And so I've been traveling a lot for the State Department. I was just in Bolivia, I was just in China. I get sent to countries where, for all intents and purposes, they don't have the best relationships with the United States. But leaders of these countries, like Bolivia, for example, which basically tends to focus its relationship on Russia and China and not the
Mhm,
United States.
mhm.
And of course, China, I spent a month in China. Um, the what happens is that on the outward front, these countries and the leadership of these countries are basically talking down the United States and saying how the US is evil and bad and this and that. But they all have children who have special needs. So I was just in Saudi Arabia a short time ago, and it's the same thing in Saudi Arabia. And I will tell you, just to give you a little prediction, I think in a very short time, Saudi Arabia and Israel are going to have peace. I think that, and I think when Saudi and Israel have peace, I think you're going to see a drastic tectonic shift kind of within the region. And that's the brilliance of the Abraham Accords, right? It's instead of just negotiating with people who really aren't interested in negotiating with you, you negotiate with everybody else. And then ultimately, it finally comes back to those people that don't want to have a relationship and they have to decide, do they want to be outcasts within the community or do they want to have a relationship? But if you keep continually just focusing on the same issues with the same people, you're never going to get anywhere. But, in Saudi Arabia,
Obviously, you're referring to the Israeli-Palestinian,
right, right, right,
and I thought that was a brilliant move. And I'm again not trying to get political either, but I thought that was a brilliant move of hitting our heads against the wall for literally decades
right.
and not getting anywhere. Let's try some other countries and see how it works there, and maybe we can circle back,
Right,
you
exactly.
know.
But so my role though is I don't do the heavy lifting. Like I'm not I don't do policy or anything like that. I don't do any of that. But what I do is when you go to a country like Saudi Arabia or when you go to a country like the UAE or when you go to China or when you go to Bolivia or wherever or just all these different countries, what happens is that the leadership of these different countries have special needs children and they don't know what to do with their kids because especially in certain parts of the Arab world, it shows there's too much of a stigma that comes with it. And if you're dealing with royalty, like the royal families, like I've been working with in some of these various countries, like the UAE, what will happen is they're worried about secession. So they don't want people, if people find out that their offspring are disabled, it can impact the succession. That people might they might look at the crown as being weak, and they might
Wow.
look at it as not having a succession plan
Mhm.
that's going to create stability. And the last thing anybody wants is instability.
Mhm.
So basically, what I do is I go to these different countries and I meet with whether business leaders or whether they're political leaders, and I meet with them and we don't talk about world affairs. We don't talk about Israel and Palestine. We don't talk about any of those types of things. All I do is talk with them about what it's like to raise a disabled child. What kind of a life is your child going to have? What kind of life are they going to live? What are they going to do? What can they look forward to? And it's a little bit of cloak and dagger in some of these countries, like when you go, because there's such a sensitivity to them meeting with an American, especially the notion of meeting with someone who has a disability because they don't want people to know that they
Mhm.
have disabilities, that their kids have disabilities. So what I do is I meet with them late at night and the State Department sets this up and it's locations of usually third party locations. So it's not an American location, it's not their location, it's usually a third party that will allow for their home to be used. And everybody pulls in at different times, and it's usually, like I say, pretty late at night. And you ultimately just talk to them as parents.
Wow.
We're not talking about big global issues. We're just talking about parents. We're just talking about like, look, what is my child going to get bullied at school? Like, what kind of life is my child going to have? What can I expect from my child? What can I do? What is it that, we can look forward to? What kind of life are they ultimately going to have? And it's my job just to talk to the parents and usually talk to the mother about, okay, you have this disabled child. Okay, this is a tough situation for you because you're worried about, what people are going to think. But here's what life is going to be like. Here are the challenges you're going
Incredible.
to face. But
Incredible.
here's ultimately going to be the kind of life your child can have if you allow for that to happen. And it was interesting because
And do
in
they know? I'm just curious, if you don't mind me cutting you off, Richard.
sure.
Do they know you're Jewish, or that's not
Oh,
really an
very much
issue?
so. Very much so. And what was fascinating was that when I was in Saudi Arabia, I was interviewed all across the country. And when I was in the UAE, I was interviewed constantly. And they didn't like they didn't say Richard Bernstein is Jewish, but everybody knows from the name.
Yeah.
So I mean, they
Kind of hard to
emphasize
hide, you know.
right, you're Bernstein. So they emphasized the name. So everybody knew that I was Jewish. And they were I mean, Saudi Arabia promoted this all across the kingdom.
Wow.
All across the kingdom. And just talking about what can happen, what we can learn
I will
from.
tell you, the United States of America is, they should be very, very grateful and proud that they have somebody like you to represent them.
Well, it's
Because,
interesting. It's very kind of you to say, but I will say, like, I've even gone into, I spend a lot of time sometimes in different territories in Israel. I've actually spent time
mhm,
doing
mhm.
this kind of work too. And there's a whole, it's fascinating because it's just done as like Israel does it as Israel does it as a favor to some of these different leaders, even though they might not get along during the day. At night, there's all kinds of conversations and discussions.
You also have to go in Israel at night, like when no one's looking.
But it's interesting because what I love about it is I love that you really are making a difference for folks. Like you are giving them a sense of hope or a sense of optimism that their lives can be better and that they
Sure.
don't that they don't have to live inside. They don't have to spend their time not going out, not doing things, that they can be a part of the community. And it's interesting, in one of the countries that I was in, um, one of the it was a member of the royal family, and he said that, you know what? He said, I'm going to let people know that my children have disabilities. And he became public about it because he felt comfortable enough to allow for this to go public, that, he had disabled kids, and he let it be known that his children were disabled.
And tell us what you're doing in Israel. Is most of your advocacy work in Israel along the same lines, or it's different there?
It's military. It's basically what we've done in Israel is we set up different units and different opportunities for people with disabilities to have the chance to serve. So in Israel, since it's compulsory, the idea is that people with disabilities were getting left out. So what I wanted to do is create, and I worked with a team, and we wanted to create an opportunity for people with disabilities to have a chance to serve and have a chance to be in the military. And
Unbelievable. That's unbelievable,
but they
Richard.
weren't, they're not on the front line, of course. But they're
Right.
working in the kitchen, or they're any great military, in order to
Of
function,
course.
has to have logistics.
Yeah.
And logistics have to be done first and foremost. For every soldier on the field, there's countless numbers of people that are working behind the scenes,
Yeah.
that are doing all the logistical work to allow for that soldier to be in an airplane or in a tank.
Yeah,
So we
the
focus on is
intelligence and food and people that are not in combat.
Well,
I
I'll tell
know.
you a quick story about intelligence. There's a Colonel Adler, who is a wonderful, wonderful man. This guy is just a remarkable man. And what he did was he decided that he's just a wonderful man to work with. And he recruited young men with autism and women with autism, but functional autism. So they were functional. Um, but what they found was that when a satellite sends an image back down to Earth, it's only as good as the person that's studying the image to determine the intelligence of it. So you're going to
Mhm.
get the picture from the satellite, but it's up to the person interpreting the picture to determine the value of what's being sent to you. And what was really wonderful about this was they used people with autism. And the autistic soldier was able to pick up on far more critical elements within the photograph that was coming down from the satellite than a soldier who didn't have autism. So they found that using autistic soldiers in intelligence was absolutely one of the greatest things that they could do, because they become so hyper fixated on a photo or hyper fixated on an image that they're going to pick up things within that image that a person who doesn't have that disability isn't going to picture or isn't going to
Unbelievable.
find.
And you know what it's reminding me of? Something you said earlier in our discussion. Can you imagine now what wonderful meaning and purpose that that function now gives to that autistic young man or woman, that is now vital for the security of the state of Israel? I mean, besides how this is helping,
Hmm.
besides how this is helping the war effort or the state of Israel, how this is helping the person. Because, you were just saying before, to deal with adversity is to find mission and purpose in your life, whether it's in your work or outside of your work. The government of Israel and your suggestion here is giving those people purpose and mission.
Well, Rabbi, it was very interesting. Where the Abraham Accords are so important, is, why they matter so much is because this is kind of what my responsibility was to do was in the Arab world, you have a want. You have a want to try to do something for people with disabilities, but they don't know how to do it. So, for example, you can build a school for people with disabilities, but if you don't know how to create the curriculum, you're not going to get anywhere. So what my job was to do was to basically partner the various Israeli NGOs with, let's say, somebody in the UAE or in
Wow.
Saudi. So the idea being that, like, wait, we want to help disabled kids, but we don't know how to
See
do it.
that you see that you never had that with the Camp David, of course. That's what I was saying to you before,
Right?
Richard. Like, can you imagine Egypt and Israel doing this together? They would be working together against Hamas right now if they had these kinds of cultural, social exchanges where one country, I mean, this is literally like out of the prophets. This is like messianic times a little. Yeah, you're helping us to bring. I'm not trying to make you into a messiah
No,
here.
no, please. But I was just in
It's
Egypt actually.
amazing. Oh
But
yeah.
I'll tell you quick. I was just in
But I
Egypt.
have to, before we get off Israel, I got to tell everybody a story. Is it because
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this story, Richard, because now that we're talking about Israel and everything you're doing for Israel through the Abraham Accords and through your work for advocacy for those with disabilities, do you remember the first time you went to Israel? You came with us. You
Oh
came
yeah, it's a great
with
trip.
MGE. It was an amazing trip, and I will never forget walking with you. And I remember you said something. Walking was not easy, and you said as we were like walking over these rocks because we were going to all these archaeological
Right.
digs, and you're like, I think the I think the flag of Israel should be a big rock,
A big
a big
boulder.
big
Yeah.
boulder or rock. I remember it was just so I remember it was so funny. It was like, and I kind of started seeing it from your perspective of, well, yeah, rocks. That's probably what you're feeling a lot of. But
Yes.
something else so powerful happened. There's a picture on my wall in my office here with myself and Rabbi Nebenzahl. I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi.
Yes,
So
I
I
do.
brought you and the rest of the group to meet one of my teachers, Rabbi Victor Nebenzahl.
In
He
the
had
old
the,
city, right?
in the old city. He was the chief
Yeah.
rabbi of the old city at the time. He's still there, just
Mm.
retired. His son is now the chief rabbi. He's a very, very holy man. He's incredibly erudite and scholarly. He goes through the entire Talmud every year. And we always go on Fridays. And at the end, he usually stands by the door, and then everybody says, he wishes everyone Shabbat Shalom as they leave. And he's a very, very humble person. He doesn't really, uh, I don't even know how to describe him. He's in another world. But he saw you, Richard. So you didn't see him, obviously,
Right.
but he saw you getting up from the table when the presentation was over. We did like a Q&A with him for about a half an hour. And then he was watching you unfold your cane and start to stand up. And he walked over to you and he wanted to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And he said to you in Hebrew, he said, thank you for coming to my home. Shabbat Shalom. And I don't know if you remember what you said to him, because I will never forget it. You said to him, Rabbi, thank you so much for inviting us into your home. The minute I walked in here and sat in your presence, I felt something extraordinarily special. I've never felt this feeling. I don't know what it is, but it's a very powerful spiritual feeling. Can you tell me what it is that you've done to be able to develop that I'm picking up on, that I'm feeling?
Sure. That's just being blind. That and most blind people are able to do that. That's a standard blind gift is that you're able to interpret, understand, and appreciate unseen energy. And most blind people can do that. It's very analogous to what animals can do, where basically dogs, it's the old Beatles song, not Beatles, Beach Boys song. You're giving off good vibrations,
Good
where
vibrations, yeah.
when the dog but the dog would sit with him on his porch and it would react differently to different people as it passed. Blind people are able to do the same exact thing because you're not distracted by the physical world. So because you aren't distracted by the physical world, what happens is you pick up on the energy. And I remember this vividly, actually going to his home. I remember it. It was the first thing we did in Jerusalem. We got to Jerusalem, we checked into the Dan Panorama Hotel, and you would ask he would say, we're going to visit a very special person. And all the various different women had to get dressed up a little bit more modestly, to go to meet with him. And then we drove over, we took the bus and walked into the old city, and we walked into his apartment. And his apartment had just a very, very pronounced energy to it. The energy, you could feel that there was just an awe-inspiring presence that the energy gave, that this energy that was given off was just an incredibly powerful energy. And you could feel it, you could sense it. It was just, it was almost magical in a way. And that's what blind people are able to have because you're not able to see. So if you can't see, you're able to pick up on everything else that's not visual. And when you pick up on things that are not visual, it allows for you to have a deeper understanding and deeper appreciation of what it is that is surrounding you. And that's what I felt in his home.
Wow. I so
But all blind
appreciate.
people can do that, though. That's not just me.
I mean,
Any
look,
blind person can do that.
I, I think, the expression takes one to know one. I think you were able to also pick up on that spiritual energy because you've got some of that of your. I'm not saying you're on the same level as
No,
Reb
no, but
Nebenzahl,
it's
but
blind people do that. It's a blind thing.
by the way, do you know what he said afterwards? You're very articulate and you're very clear when you speak. And he was embarrassed when you didn't mean to embarrass him, of course. He's an exceptionally modest person. I had to beg him to allow me to take a picture of him. And he said, well, you asked him this question, what is it that you've done to cultivate this incredible, spiritual whatever it is that you said, and he didn't answer because he was embarrassed, or he was just too modest. So you repeated the question because I think you thought like maybe he didn't hear you. So he said, "Oh," and you just said the same thing again. And he said it very quietly. I've had the great honor of sitting at the feet of giants in Torah and in scholarship, meaning like he put it away from himself. He said, maybe what you're picking up on is because I've sat in the presence of other greats. He's just like a very, very modest kind of individual. He didn't want to say it was anything he was responsible for. But that was just like a moment that I will never
Mhm.
forget. And I really appreciated that. And maybe that's, I'm wondering, Richard, like, I don't think I've ever asked you this. You've been blind your entire life.
That's right.
You were born with this,
Hmm.
right? So it's not like you went from being able to see to not, but I'm just wondering if that's, your ability to pick up on things. You said it so beautifully. You're not as distracted by the fit. Now you do hear things, and you have a sense of touch and smell. So you are encountering the physical world. You and I are having
Right.
this conversation in a real way. Um, but because you're not distracted by things you're seeing, sight obviously is very powerful.
Right.
That you can pick up on. It's just amazing that you picked up on something that a lot of us feel, but maybe don't feel it as powerfully as you do. Wondering whether or not that makes you, um, that gives you the potential for even greater, spiritual connection with Hashem.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know about that, but I think it allows you to connect with people. And I think that going back to our earlier dialogue, which is that people with disabilities have an ability to connect because everybody is touched by disability. Everybody.
Yeah.
There's no one in I mean, everyone knows someone that has a disability. Everyone relates to someone with a disability. There's no one who isn't exempt from having a disability. Everybody has some form of connection to disability. And I think that in terms of the connection that it ultimately creates, it allows you to connect with other people. And I'll just tell you a very quick story. So I was in Cairo, Egypt, and the State Department had asked me to go to Egypt because you had talked about the issues of Jordan and Egypt and but in kind of correlation between the peace that exists between Egypt and Jordan, and then the peace that exists with the UAE and the Gulf states through the Abraham Accords. But what's very interesting to understand is that Egypt has a very, very large Palestinian population that it
Mhm.
kind of exists within it. And Egypt, in terms of the war and what was going on with the war, there was a lot of pressure being put onto the Egyptian government as to kind of what to do and what they should be supporting and this and that. So the State Department said, Richard, would you be willing to go to Egypt because it will create a distraction? And what I asked was like, well, what do you mean by a distraction? And they said, this is really fascinating. 30%, think of that number, 30% of the Egyptian population has a severe disability.
Whoa, whoa.
30%. Now that can also involve diabetes and things of that sort, but 30% of Egypt,
Just for context, what is it in the United States as far as you know?
oh, in the United States, it's probably between 5 and 7%,
Oh my
but
gosh,
like
this is
30% of the Egyptian population, that's just a staggering number, have a disability. And when we got there, the embassy, of course, hosted a whole big event and did all the stuff that embassies do. But they were shocked by because the US wasn't really popular. This was, I went during the war. I mean, the war is going on, of course, but I was there kind of over the summer and it was the height of it. And
this past summer.
past summer, yeah, I was in.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
So what you have to understand is that if you're watching what I've learned from this whole experience is that if you're watching TV in Egypt, you think that the United States and Israel are just horrific because they're showing little kids dying and they're showing, I mean, you can only imagine.
I watch Al Jazeera once in a while to get a
Okay,
little
but you
sense.
got to watch. But I got to tell you something. If you're in Egypt and you watch what they're watching, it's even more it
Right.
is Al Jazeera and then and Al Arabiya and but it's not flattering. And people were getting very upset. But what was fascinating was that I spent about a month in Egypt, that when we did our kind of Egyptian tour and met with, and literally all of their different news channels and their newspapers and all their forms of media covered this, but they covered it in the most positive way. And the embassy said it was the first time they'd ever gotten positive coverage since the war started. But it was really positive because this was something that really affected the people of Egypt because so many people are impacted. And I share this because, a lot of, you deal with a lot of families. And, I would imagine within the families that you're dealing with, there's a lot of parents that are having children with disabilities, right? And it's a very tough thing to have to deal with. It's not the easiest thing when your dream is to have a healthy child and that dream is shattered and it doesn't kind of turn out to be the dream that you were hoping it was going to turn out to be. And what you have to realize is that I've come to see that there's a reason for it. Is because there are so many people that are affected with it that it creates the ability to have relationships with people who otherwise would not have a relationship with you. Disability is the unifier. It is an absolute unifier, and it brings people together in a manner that otherwise wouldn't happen because it is the great unifier. When I was in Israel during the war, not this war, but the war that they had during COVID, that war, it was like a 3-week war that they had with Hamas.
Yeah, yeah, I
The
remember.
Israeli government asked me, they said, look, we need you to go on television and we need you to I had become very close with there's a sheikh that I became very, very close with out of the UAE, who is a leader kind of in this, who's just who basically is able to move a lot of people. And I called the sheikh and I said, would you be willing to go on TV with me to talk about the work that we're doing together for people with disabilities. And he said yes. And he went on television, and Israel broadcasted it all through the Arab countries. But he went on TV and he came on with me and he said, we have to go from the darkness into the light. We cannot go back. We cannot go back to what we once were. We've learned too much. We've benefited too much. This peace relationship is far too significant. We must stay in the light and we must never return to the darkness.
Wow.
And the reason he said that was because his family had disabilities. And as a result, he was seeing the benefits of the Abraham Accords, and he was seeing the fact that, wow, like there's all these new things that are being invented, and wow, there's schools that are opening up that his kids can go to, and that there's like all these
Beautiful.
new opportunities that are being created that he never ever thought would ever happen. But they were happening, and he didn't want that to be stopped. Now, I will tell you, he's okay now, but there's still a little bit of danger to doing some of this because after he went on TV, and I had felt horrible about this, after he went on TV with me during that war, someone tried to kill him. He was the victim of an assassination attempt, but he survived, so he's okay. He didn't get killed, but someone did try to kill him for the fact that he went on TV and did that. That was in the UAE, and stuff like that doesn't happen too often in the UAE because they have a lot of security.
Yeah.
But he
Well,
was.
I've always said you're a dangerous guy to hang
I
around with,
am.
Richard.
I have felt bad
I'm
about
nervous
that.
about this podcast right now, just being on with
Yeah.
you.
Well, I have to tell you, I have felt bad about that ever since that happened, that he was, that he's fine now, but
Right.
someone did try to kill him. But I know
But that quote, I wrote it down while you were speaking. Stay in the light and never return to the darkness. Just so
that was coming
beautiful.
from Ahmed al-Mazari. That was the sheikh that basically he was the one that made that comment. And
Wow.
he did that on television, and Israel was able to then take that quote and send it because there was a lot of pressure during the last war for the countries to leave the Abraham Accords and no longer be a part of it.
Well,
But
if we could dream a little, I mean, can you imagine a world where that becomes the norm, where we're really collaborating with each other to help each other on issues like this, and we don't have
I
the.
think, Rabbi, I think that I think with the new administration, I think that, and again, I'm a liberal Democrat, so I'm
Mhm.
just saying, but I think with the new administration, I think what you're going to find, and I think you're going to find that it's going to happen relatively soon. I do believe there's going to be, and had said this before, but I'll just say it again because I think it bears repeating. I think once you have peace with Saudi Arabia, I really do think that that's going to be the big change. I think that and I think Israel and Saudi are already working together. I know this because I was in Saudi Arabia, and I can share with you from the people that I met with in Saudi Arabia and the exposure that we got in Saudi Arabia and the coverage that I got in Saudi Arabia. They were so open to this. They were so open to disability. And the fact that they gave this wall-to-wall coverage to a Jewish person as a guest within the kingdom, I think
Incredible.
shows where they're going and what they're attempting to do. But I know that our time is running short, but
Mhm.
I want to share, if I can, one of the challenges that comes with life and some of the decisions that we make and some of the things that we do that do present some hardships for us that can become very, very difficult and that weigh on our minds. And I made a decision, one of the decisions that we made on this court that I still think was one of the toughest decisions that we had to make was during the COVID time when the hospitals were overrun and things were just completely, it was just a nightmare what was going on. And I remember we made a very difficult decision to open up the state, to basically overrule the governor.
I
And
remember. I remember.
yes,
I remember talking to you about this during
and
COVID.
overrule, and basically the court overturned the governor and basically forced the state to reopen during that very difficult time. And it still bears with me because I know a lot of people probably did die because of that. But at the same time, it was one of those situations where, People have to have freedom to make their own decisions, and people have to have freedom to basically make their own determinations. And I think, Rabbi, it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. There are certain ideals that we live or die off of. And I'm a believer of the Bill of Rights. I'm a believer of the US Constitution. And ultimately, the Bill of Rights, you can't, you asked, what is it that kind of keeps you going? And I think we all have certain ideals, whether they're religious, whether they're found in governance, whatever they might be. But those ideals are the things that allow for us to function as people and as humans and ultimately do the things that we try to do and that we ultimately attempt to do. But I was a believer that you can't put a pause on the Bill of Rights, because if you put a pause on the Bill of Rights and you say, well, we're going to suspend the Bill of Rights, we're not going to allow people to gather, we're not going to allow people to go out, we're not going to allow people to have lives, we're going to have total control on the movement of people. If you allow the government to do that one time, then ultimately what you're saying is that the government can do that anytime, and that what distinguishes one crisis from another crisis. And in order to basically uphold that, people died. I mean, people, because of the decision that was made, there were a lot of people that we probably lost as a result of that. But at the same time, it was for an ideal, and it was for a belief, and it was for a value that we need to make sure that ultimately certain rights are protected, and that you can't just simply say that this is an extraordinary situation, and as a result of that, we're going to suspend certain basic rights that have basically gone into our governance structure since the beginning of our country. And sometimes in life, you're going to have to sometimes make decisions, and you live with them and you have guilt with it because you know that because of what you did, someone probably died.
But
But
but but at the same time, and I remember talking to you about this, Richard, there were a lot of consequences, very negative consequences, maybe not life and death, but development for children and other types
right.
of things that are people are still suffering from because there was too much shutdown. People acknowledge now in certain states in this country. And I
It's a
know that you
very
were,
tough thing.
I know you were concerned about that. It wasn't just the Bill of Rights, it was people's mental health. And
Correct. No, but you're correct. But I just think that sometimes all of us are going to be faced with making decisions that we have to live with. And the only thing that you can do, or that you try to do, is do the best you can with the decisions that you have to make, and try to live with your own conscience as best as you possibly can, even though knowing that what you ultimately did caused. And I think that the way you have to look at it is you're absolutely right, because it should have been left open. The way Florida did it was correct, letting people do it. But there's still something about being in that linear chain, or being a part of something that led to someone's death or someone's demise, is always a very difficult thing. But there are people that have to make those kind of
yeah,
determinations and make those decisions. And that's why MJE is so important. It all goes back to that's why MJE is so important, because you need to have some kind of a community and some kind of a higher power that you're able to believe in and that you're able to be a part of, that allows for you to realize that this isn't all on you, that ultimately that these decisions that you're having to ultimately make, going through these extraordinary times and difficult phases, they're that you have to look a little bit to the heavens and realize that, okay, you know what? You're part of something, it's bigger than you, and you can only do the best with what you can do.
yeah. Well, with that level of modesty that you possess and that kind of spiritual perspective that you bring to the bench, I can't even, I mean, you are a walking Kiddush Hashem, which is the Hebrew
Yeah.
for
There's
sanctification
a
of
lot of
Hashem's
people who would
name.
disagree with that.
I,
I can find them for you.
I mean, just the breadth of things that you have accomplished in your life, Richard, and what you are doing now for not just America, for Israel, for Arab people, for people all over the world who have disabilities or children with disabilities. And you're doing the best thing with it. You're not just helping them with their problems, you're using it to bring people together. I mean,
We
that is
try. But I'll tell you something very interesting is that one of the things I wish, and I know you have a lot of physicians that are part of MJE, and
Hmm.
I want to emphasize this because I think it's very important. We at the court, we have to make in many situations, it's not uncommon to get end of life decisions,
Yeah.
the rights for people to end their
Mhm.
life and those types of things. And one of the things that I think, and I'm noticing this just in my injuries, is that people that have experienced catastrophic injury when they were younger, that injury becomes more painful because they develop arthritis and the arthritis becomes very intensive. And I think so often what we have to look at, and I think it's both symbolic as well as pragmatic, is we have to learn and look at how people manage pain. And in my situation, it's a physical pain, but that physical pain affects every aspect of your life and what you do. But also, people are living with spiritual pain, and you have to try to find a way to kind of work with that. And I think that in many situations, if people like rabbis or physicians or things of that are able to address both the physical pain or spiritual pain, but mainly physical pain that a lot of people suffer from, I think what you would find is that things would become a lot easier on people and that people make decisions and do certain things because they're in a very painful position. And if they're experiencing like I say, if we were able to develop like medications or ways that people could deal with physical pain, I'm willing to bet that you would have people that would be much happier and
Sure.
you wouldn't have the end of life challenges that so many people are having right now because they're in such a difficult place. And so I think that, you're talking to folks that can make a difference or do things, but people who work in healthcare and do those kinds of things, they should really make an emphasis on dealing with pain and allowing for the physical pain to be dealt with, because I think you would find that if you can do that, you will make life a lot easier for a lot of other people.
Um, Well, I think
But even
that's a
with
great.
that, I still
I
did my 27th marathon. So,
I think that's an amazing way to end this conversation because you're really helping people deal with pain and you're teaching us, Richard, we're learning from you how all of us, because maybe, okay, so you said 6 or 7% in America have disabilities. We all have some kind of
right.
disability, whether it's a physical one, it's a spiritual one. Nobody is exempt from some kind of some kind of disability in their life. That's what rabbis are trained to do. Doctors maybe are there for the physical ones, we're there for the spiritual ones, but we all have to learn how to stay just not just positive, find that meaning and that purpose in life, whether it's in the work you do like you do, or whether it's in volunteering on the side, finding Hashem, Torah, and mitzvos, living for something beyond yourself, being part of something bigger than yourself. I'm just sort of recapping some of the great wisdom that you've been
Ah,
sharing with us. Richard, thank you so much
thank you.
for coming on, and Hashem should continue to bless you because I do believe you're an incredibly blessed person, and you've shared that blessing now, not just with when you were in New York, but on the bench in Michigan, in Dubai, in Egypt, in Israel, literally all over the world. Hashem should give you the strength to continue to spread the love and the inspiration that you have done so far, and you should just continue to keep running those marathons. You'll do the Ironman again someday. I know you will. Um,
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
and I
And when I
hope.
turn 70, we have mandatory retirement. See, I'm going to be here forever. So when we turn 70,
Yeah.
I'm going to come and work for MJE.
Oh,
So,
the
you
job
know,
is waiting for you.
is it
You
really? Because
are you
I'm
kidding?
going to take you up on it.
I would take you in a sec. I take you now, but you got this, bench and you wear a nice
I know I
robe.
still have
You
20
know,
more years, but the thing is that when this is done, because we mandatory retire at 70.
70.
So
Yeah.
when this is done, I am coming to work at MJE and I'm
It would,
very, very excited about it.
and the money here is unbelievable. You'll
That's
just
what I've
see.
heard.
Yeah, the money's incredible.
Oh,
So
trust me, I'm rolling in it now. So don't,
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. Exactly. This
Can't
was
even
great.
afford my robe. So So yeah, that's what I've heard. The enticements are just, but it's very easy to entice anyone from public service. You can entice over relatively easily. Maybe Wall Street might be different, but if anybody that's involved in public service, I'll just give you a very quick example. The legislature was supposed to vote on giving us and I don't mind. I mean, I love the work, so the work is what matters. But public service is public service. You have to make a choice, right? You make a decision when you leave a law firm or you leave the private sector, just like what you did, to go and do public service because you're in the religious service, which is public service. But when you make a choice in life, you have to be comfortable with that decision. I'm not able to do the things that the rest of my family is able to do because I made a decision to go into public service. You have to be comfortable with that. You have to say, okay, you know what? I'm going to make a lifestyle choice that's going to affect, the things I can do, the places I can go, and the experiences I can have. But you have to do it because you believe in what it is that you're doing. And sometimes in life, people will come to those roads where you're working on Wall Street, you're making, I can assure you, a lot more than I am. I mean, first year lawyers are making more than I am. But the thing is that it's one of those situations where you do it because you believe in it, you love it, and the money isn't why you do what you do. You do it for something bigger, for something grander, for something greater, and you do it for something that you genuinely believe in. But my favorite story was the judges had asked we were supposed to, it went before the legislature. They were going to give us a $10,000 raise it was a $10,000 raise over 5 years. And the legislature voted it down. That was my favorite.
Nah,
that
nah,
was,
nah.
forget
We'll
it.
spend it on something else.
That was my
Well,
absolute.
thank God you're not doing this for the money, my friend. I
Yeah,
mean,
so that's
but
why,
you
but
were
my
so
point is,
literally born to do this. Literally born to do
but
this.
that's why I'm coming to work at MJE. When I retire from here, I'm going to come to MJE and I'm really excited because your sales pitch has won me over big time.
Richard, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank
I
you,
know how
Rabbi.
valuable it is. Thank you so, so much. And you should go, as we say in Hebrew, Mechal El Chayil, from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. God bless you all. God bless all your people.
Thank you. Amen.